reintroduced animals. Some of those reintroduced animals did in fact make their way into the state. They started tagging them later on in the reintroduction. But we started seeing an increase in bear numbers over really the next 50 years at that point, to the point where it got to the level where we had a bear population. We felt confident that we had a reproducing bear population within the state that is still, of course, connected to that Arkansas population. But by the time we hit the 1990s, we wrote our first bear management plan. It was largely developed on gaining just kind of a basic understanding. We would put calls out for people to report bear sightings and things like that. But at that point, we really didn't have a ton of information on bears in the state, population levels, not a whole lot of information on distribution. And at that time in the 80s and 90s, it was really thought that bears required substantially large tracts of expansive connected forest. And we looked at much of our forest and said, well, we have some areas that would be suitable for bears. But at that time, we didn't think that we had that much land that would be suitable for bears. What we know now, bears are super adaptable, and we do see them in a lot of our forested lands. And so in 2008, we updated our bear management plan. That update really focused on identifying some of the key research needs. So what was it that we needed to do to really get an understanding of bears in the state? And that kicked off our very first large-scale bear research project and allowed us to develop an initial population estimate in 2012. And so that kind of gives you the picture of how we got to where we are with bears in the state. But the current status is really that bears are becoming increasingly more common in our state. We see range expansion occurring annually, and that population is growing in size. So the last model run associated with our bear population, if we look at our 2021 numbers, around 800 bears in the state, a pretty wide range on that, and we'll touch on that as we get into the research. But currently, our bear population is growing at about 8% annually. So with that, the doubling rate of the population takes a little over 10 years. And so that's really, really rapid growth. With that rapid growth, we are seeing that rapid range expansion. And so we'll get towards some of those management challenges in the end, but a lot of our management challenges are really associated with that rapid expansion of the bear population here. Now, our bear population is connected to a much larger population in the central interior highlands. So if we're looking at the state of Missouri and Arkansas and Oklahoma, we are connected to this bigger population. Some of our genetic work really shows that we are most connected to that Arkansas population, and the Arkansas population that occupies the Ozarks of Arkansas, which is up here in the northern border. Down on this end is the Ouachitas of Arkansas, and that's where they overlap with that Oklahoma population. But early on in our genetics work, we did detect a small number of bears that were part of this Ouachita population as well. So kind of just giving you the picture of where we are connected to bear populations. Obviously, further to the north in Wisconsin and Minnesota, you've got bears up there, but that is not where we have bears in our state. We don't have established bears really north of the Missouri River at this point. There we go. Now, our bear management is really focused on a multifaceted approach. We recently updated our bear management plan in 2020, and the update to this plan really allowed us to kind of hone in on the specific actions that we needed to do, create really high-level strategic goals and objectives to help move bear management over the next decade. And really, this focuses on science-based approaches. And so the first goal of our bear management plan is to really use science-based methods to manage this self-sustaining population. And so we're looking at different types of research, monitoring, how we utilize research to inform population management and setting population benchmarks and things like that, and how that information can help us inform habitat management as well. When we look at goal 2 of our bear management plan, this is really focused on increasing awareness. So as we have this expanding bear population, what that really means for us is that we have bears moving into areas where folks have never had to think about living with bears in their entire lifetime. And so there is a cultural shift that has to occur as bears continue to expand in the state. And we really have to create that awareness. So we've really moved forward on some extensive educational campaigns. And I think that is something that we will continue to see in our future, moving forward on some of those really focused efforts on creating that awareness that we do have bears in the state of Missouri. And then the final goal of our management plan, which actually has the most numbers of strategies, not surprising, is minimizing and addressing human-bear conflict. So we have about 6 million residents in the state of Missouri. The vast majority of those residents occur between the two cities on either end of the state, so St. Louis and Kansas City. And the way our habitat works here, and I'll show you a little bit in some of our slides, we do have very connected habitat that funnels bears into the St. Louis metro area. And so one of the things that we're working on is really minimizing and addressing human-bear conflict where that occurs within the primary bear range, but also recognizing that that conflict expands as that bear range expands. And so working with those areas where this is new to help minimize and address that. For many of our folks, electric fencing around beehives is not something that they think about. Electric fencing around chicken coops, not something that they think about. How they manage their trash, they are not doing that with bears in mind. And so again, we're really talking about kind of changing minds and changing approaches as that bear population continues to expand. Now, our management efforts here in the state, as with many other states that work with black bears, are really informed by extensive research. So we started our initial population study back in 2010. We have continued some level of bear research and really quite extensive bear research since then. So really thinking about that, we're approaching our 13th year of relatively extensive bear research. And that research has been instrumental in informing our management decisions, but also gaining public support and awareness of our management decisions as well. So our first initial population study was focused on hair snares. That's how we developed our initial population estimate of around 300 to 350 bears. We continued on with that work and transitioned into a survival and recruitment study that was really focused on collecting the necessary demographic data to inform a population trajectory model. So once we had that initial population estimate, we really wanted to know how quickly our population was growing and then model that out so that we could continue to monitor that growth and use that to help us inform management decisions. As part of this work, we had lots of collars out on a lot of bears. And so we had the additional opportunity to look at bear movements and habitat use as part of this study as well. So not unlike other places, this is a common way of studying bears. We've conducted den work since about 2014. So collecting that demographic data for a number of years at this point. Here in Missouri, we are not so far south that bears don't den. So our bears do den. Many of our bears that have yearlings or are by themselves, if it stays warm, they do remain relatively active, but we do typically see a denning period for the vast majority of our bears. They do settle down, and any of those pregnant sows, they do den for several months. So we get cold enough here and food resources become limited enough that those bears continue to den here, and they do enter those dens. We see a variety of different den types, not all that different from what you all see most likely in terms of dens. We've got a lot of brush pile bears. Where our bears occur, we have a lot of shortleaf pine restoration, which results in taking down oak trees, a lot of times in this situation when the leaves are still on. And so we have a lot of bears that den in those. We get a lot of wind events on our higher slopes. And so we have bears denning in blowdowns and things like that. We do get bears that den in and under trees, so some of those hollow tree cavities where we have some of those older stands. But then we do have a ton of karst topography here in the state. And so we do see a number of bears that utilize that karst topography. So whether that ends up being rock crevices or areas where we've had rock slides and they can get into some of those cracks to full-on caves. We've had bears den within extensive cave systems to the point where you can't get signals out of those on those bears. We had one instance where we had a bear that was missing during the winter. We flew as much as we could never pick up her collar. And the Mark Twain National Forest in the southern part of the state works collaboratively with the Cave Research Foundation to do cave surveys. And we got a call one day from the Cave Research Foundation that one of their cave surveyors was in a cave that was basically a long tube that went about 75 feet, made a hard left turn, and then went into the main chamber of the cave. And when he went into that, that tube, made the turn, shined his light and saw eyes looking back at him down into the chamber, realized that there were more than one set of eyes, saw the box of the collar, and then at that point realized he was looking at least 2 bears. And turns out he was looking at a sow with 2 of her yearlings in that den. And it just it was the sow that we had been missing. So so most of our dens are not necessarily that extreme of a cave system, but we do have bears that utilize those on a relatively regular basis. So that karst topography presents some interesting challenges in terms of den work, but also some just really interesting opportunities where most folks, they think of a bear denning in a cave. If you ask anyone in the public, what does a bear den look like? They'll describe a cave to you. And so we do have some of those, not just those brush pile bears. And then we also conduct a fair bit of summer bear trapping to check those bears that we weren't able to access in the den, add new bears to the studies that we're doing and things like that. One of our challenges here has been that obviously it gets hot here in the state of Missouri. And so it is not uncommon for us to have very high humidity and temperatures that are well into the 80s and 90s for a good portion of the summer. So we actually worked pretty extensively on modifications to traps so that we ensured that we were considering animal welfare while we were conducting these activities. So the traps that we largely use are on trailer traps. We build them in-house, and a substantial portion of the trap is ventilated metal so that there is a lot of air movement in these traps. They work really, really well for us. We don't have bears that are heat stressed, but we also do not trap when the temperature gets above 90 degrees. So we make sure that we don't have bears in those traps when it is that hot. So that's one of those sometimes limiting factors for us into the summer. Our trapping season here generally lasts about mid-May when turkey season ends into the end of June, generally speaking. And by that point in time, the blackberries have ripened, so we don't get bears on bait as easily, and then it starts to get too hot. So we can't be trapping into the true heat of the summer. We sometimes get a little bit of a window prior to deer season opening in the fall, but for the most part, the bulk of our trapping really happens in May and June. And all of that information has been compiled since 2014 to really get to the demographic information that we need to model the growth of our bear population. So when we looked at how we approach population modeling, we collected a variety of different demographic data, so survival rates of different age classes, reproductive capacity, reproductive probability, and things like that. And then we were also really mindful of areas where we might be data deficient. So we took the approach to take a conservative approach to modeling our population. So one particular area was survival rates of yearlings. We don't collar yearlings currently, and we do not have our study designed to be a true mark recapture study. So we don't have great survival information on yearlings. When we looked at the survival rates that we had for yearlings, they were really, really high compared to what you see in the literature. So we made the decision to utilize literature values to be more reflective of what those survival rates are likely to be. Had we used our data, our model projections would have been that much higher because we had such high survival rates for yearlings. So taking that conservative approach, looking at some of those data deficient parameters, but the vast majority of the demographic information that we use to model our population is Missouri specific data that we've collected over the last 8 to 10 years, generally speaking. And so we started out with that initial population of around 350 bears in 2012, and that was from the hair snare study. Projected that out to 2019 using all of that demographic information. We estimated we had between 540 and 840 bears, and that the population was growing at about 9% annually. So in 2019, that is where we initiated the update of our bear management plan. It was a really great opportunity for us to go through. We were due for an update to our plan. It had been a little over 10 years since the last plan was updated, but now we had more specific population information that we could use to help inform that. That population estimate also allowed us to kick off conversations surrounding the first hunting season here in the state. So project that forward, looking at 2021, again, I said we had around 800 bears, again, still growing at around 8 to 9% annually. But the challenge with where we are with this population model is that as we get further out from that initial population estimate, the range of the population estimate gets wider and wider. So we've actually undertaken a new study that I'll talk about here in a little bit to get us back down to another point estimate of the population for which we can then model out into the future. And then we're developing what we hope will be kind of a monitoring protocol that will allow us to continue to project the growth of the population, but not have to undertake really large scale hair snare studies every 10 years to get us another point estimate. So that study is kind of ongoing at this point, and I'll touch base on that in a little bit here. So some of the other information that we were able to gather from that collar data really focused on black bear habitat, critical linkages and things like that. So we looked at connectivity, and these two papers were done kind of early in that study and really identified what core bear habitat looked like in the state. So if we were being really, really conservative and looking at selection, this is when our population was at lower levels. This is when bears are really choosy. They're selecting the highest quality habitat in the state. So we've continued to look at how we can use that information to help inform management decisions. So one of the other things that we looked at was how do black bear reports interact with habitat and connectivity? And how can we use that information to help predict where we should be prioritizing our outreach efforts? So not every community in Missouri is equal in terms of the probability of a bear interacting with that place. And so here what we're looking at are areas that were projected to have that potential for bear conflict. And those areas in blue are those areas that have reported that. And so utilizing this to help us inform how we take that approach to bear management. And this is strictly based on that projected habitat and connectivity. So the bulk of our bear population is really down here in the southern third of the state. And so ideally at this point, we have the ability to really focus on these communities down here within that core bear range that maybe we need to make a little bit more effort. We don't have a ton of bear reports interacting with those areas, but then also focus on some of these expansion areas as bears move into areas further north. What are some of these communities that we can be proactive with in education and hopefully get ahead of the curve in terms of minimizing and addressing human bear conflict? And much of that information was really informed by looking at overall habitat suitability and connectivity. So not surprising, we're looking at forest here, forested landscape, and the vast majority of our really connected forest is in the southern half of the state. So the Missouri River runs right along here. So really south of the Missouri River. And this is considered our Ozark Highlands. So this is the Ozark forests of the state. And when we look at this connectivity, so the brighter the yellow, the higher the connectivity, so the higher probability that a bear would pass from point A to point B using that particular circuit. One of the things that we like to point out here is the reason this is all just that general pink is this gigantic chunk of bear habitat here is just super connected. So a bear can really go anywhere. So there's not two nodes that are better connected one way or the other. It's all just really, really connected. And so we do see bears utilizing these landscapes, and this connectivity comes into play when we think about what that means for human bear conflict and bear range expansion in the state as we move forward. We were also lucky enough to conduct a survey of Missouri residents looking at attitudes towards black bears and black bear management. A lot of this survey is really going to help us inform how we approach bear education, but also how we establish population benchmarks and how we start to assess social carrying capacity. So we took a little bit of a unique approach in terms of the survey design here. we did not want to conduct just a randomized survey of all Missouri residents, because the reality is our bear population really inhabits the southern third of the state. But the bulk of our human population is over here in the St. Louis metro area, over here in the Kansas City metro area. And then we have two other big cities, Columbia, Missouri, and then Springfield, Missouri down here. And so if we were to just randomize a sample of Missouri residents, the vast majority would end up falling out into those cities, not likely have any interactions with bears, and not really inform how we would approach assessing social carrying capacity within the core of bear range. So when do we hit that capacity? When we have enough bears in certain areas. So we took a different approach. We stratified this survey across our 3 bear regions, what we considered our bear regions. And so it's a stratified random sample, but it does not provide us with statewide results. So that's one thing that as we look at the results of this survey, we need to be really mindful that this is not reflective of all Missourians. This is reflective of that stratified sample and our sampling approach. But what it allows us to do is ensure that we have representation from all of those counties that occur within bear range. So Ripley County down here is one of our least populated counties in the state. The likelihood of us even surveying somebody if we took a fully random sample was really, really low. So we wanted to make sure that we were understanding what those local attitudes were towards bears to allow us to really inform population benchmarks and social carrying capacity. We also had the ability to additionally survey those folks who had reported human-bear interactions to us. So looking at the differences between those that have not had a human-bear interaction versus those that have. While we are seeing an increase in human-bear interactions, we are still lucky those interactions are low relative to the number of people we have in the state, but it is on the increase. So with that, we asked questions associated with different types of attitudes towards bears, different types of bear management and things like that. But we asked, just for general awareness, do you think the bear population's increasing? Is it stable, declining? It's concerning to me that we have a lot of folks that think it's declining or endangered. But when we ask, what do you think about the level of the bear population in Missouri? A lot of folks say it's about right. Some say it's too low. And then we have some that say it's too high. And then we can dig down deeper to see what this distribution looks like. As that bear population continues to increase, our intent is to resurvey every 5 to 10 years to understand what those changes look like and use this to help set some of those benchmarks as we move forward with bear management into the future. And then our most recent study is using hair snares. So a similar design to many hair snare studies, similar to what we did in 2012 to get our initial population estimate. But this study is really used right now to reassess our population estimate. So get us another point estimate for which we can project growth into the future. And then allow us to link those landscape features and help understand what the distribution of bear density looks like. So how can we utilize this information to help inform management decisions? And then as we move towards in the future, using harvest as a way to manage the bear population, understanding the impacts of that. And things like that. And this information will help us inform those population benchmarks as we move forward. So we had our first season of this study back in 2022, set up 24 hair snare arrays, collected about 670 samples in 15 of our 24 arrays. And then the next step is to add arrays to this. So the red dots, the arrays that we surveyed in 2022, this is largely what we would consider our core of bear range. So now we are moving into surveying what we consider to be our expansion areas. So Lake of the Ozarks, the St. Louis area, some of these other areas further north where bears are fewer in numbers, but they certainly reside in many of these areas. And so all of the information that we've gleaned from the research, that we prioritized how we collected this information and how we used it to understand management decisions. We really utilized that information to help us successfully implement our first bear hunting season. So I'll kind of go through the stepwise approach that we took to implementing this very first season. And it is important to note that when I say the first season, it's the first modern day bear hunting season. We did not have We have not had an actual regulated bear hunting season in the state of Missouri until our very first season occurred in 2021. So looking at how we developed the framework, the research results were used in almost every step of the way to help inform how we approached establishing this season, what that looked like, how we lined out dates and timing and things like that. But we also relied heavily on staff and partner and public input to inform all of these bear management decisions. So our bear management plan was written with collaboration from the National Park Service, from the Forest Service, from Missouri DNR, in conjunction with a lot of public input on that management plan. And then as we stepped through development of a season framework, we collected public input along the way as well to help inform that season framework. So some of the very initial public input that we had related to hunting season, in 2017, we were still using our bear population estimate of around 300, just under 300, but that the commission had established a benchmark of around 500 bears where we would begin talking about establishing a bear hunting season. And so we conducted 80th anniversary open houses. So at that time, that was the 80th anniversary of the Conservation Commission. So we went around the state conducting these public meetings. And one of the questions that we asked folks was, would you be in favor of allowing a limited harvest once bear numbers exceeded that threshold? And 73% of respondents to those open meetings said yes, they would. During our bear management plan open houses, we asked folks if they would support or oppose a highly regulated limited hunting season. For those that attended our open houses, we conducted a series of 4 open houses across the state. One of those open houses was conducted in St. Louis, and we had over 400 attendees at that open house. So 87% of the open house respondents said they would support a bear season. We also allowed for online comment during the management plan update, and 59% of online respondents supported that highly regulated season. So there was that public support for having those conversations. We determined at that point that our population was at levels that could sustain a really limited harvest. And so we started stepping through what does that look like and developing a proposed framework that we could then solicit public feedback on prior to actually making any regulatory recommendations. So one of the first things that we looked at was the establishment of bear management zones. What would the distribution of harvest look like on the landscape? And so in doing this, we took a stepwise approach. We first started looking at bear habitat across the southern part of the state. Again, that's really where the bulk of our bears occur. But we also looked at measures of vulnerability to harvest. So how accessible are many of these large forest tracts by roads? What does that look like? Because we wanted to make sure that we were distributing harvest across bear range and that we would not be concentrating harvest in any one area, and that we'd have the ability to have those differences in management approaches with those zones. So in doing that, we kind of looked at kind of the 3 broad parts of the state. And then we wanted to make the understanding of bear management zones easy for hunters. So we looked at major roadways. And so those bear management zones follow major highways and major roadways. We've got a lot of gravel roads in the state of Missouri. We got a lot of Forest Service roads in the state of Missouri. We have a lot of really rural roads that aren't necessarily labeled, and we did not want to be using those for boundaries. We wanted to make the boundaries really, really clear for the hunter. So utilizing those major roadways. And then we looked at timing. So in order to understand when it would be optimal for us to place our bear season, we utilized our collar data to understand when the vast majority of our bears entered their winter dens. So we're not going to put a season when we would not be likely to have bears accessible. So we focused on kind of the window for which bears are active, keeping in mind potential conflict with other seasons. So we weren't going to overlap our bear season with our rifle season, which is when we have 250,000 deer hunters in the woods. And, so we wanted to make sure that that we were really being mindful of what those sideboards could be And then we also looked at female movement rates. So from the beginning, my mindset of a season was that we were going to time it such that it would make management sense in the future. So I wanted to make sure that as we approached establishing population benchmarks, that we'd have the ability to harvest both males and females. So we timed it when both sexes would be active, but we looked at movement data and timed it such that this is at a time period when our females limit their activities. So they aren't moving across the landscape as much. And so we utilize that collar data to really identify when that cutoff occurs prior to denning season. And so for us, we looked at that. That's the third Monday in October. That coincides well with movement. It also falls after the Columbus Day holiday. And in learning from what other states have done, we did not want to have our opening on a weekend, just because we wanted to approach that kind of conservative stepwise approach. So we proposed a 10-day season that would close if a bear zone management quota was filled. We'd have those bear management zone specific harvest quotas. You'd only be able to take one bear. You could use archery or firearms. We would not allow for the use of bait or dogs at this time, but we did indicate that we may reconsider that should management needs change. And that we proposed creating a bear management zone specific permit for which somebody would have to apply for and then buy that permit if they were drawn. We have a lot of landowner permits in the state. We have landowner deer permits, landowner turkey permits. We have exemptions from permits for landowners in some cases. We did not take that approach with bears. So a landowner would still be required to have a permit. However, we did not create a landowner specific permit, but instead created a minimum allocation for qualifying landowners. So we proposed at that time that 10% of our permits would go to qualifying landowners. So we collected a variety of public input on that proposed framework, and we really looked for themes, ideas. Are there things that we might have missed when developing this framework? So we collected that framework online through written comment, through a Qualtrics survey that anybody could go in and fill out. We had just under 5,000 comments, emails, handwritten letters, phone calls. We did receive form letters in general opposition to bear hunting. And about 4,000 people provided that comment online. Many of the comments had common phrases and things like that that were repeated, where you could tell that some of it was taken from form letters and things like that. But we really used this to help look at the framework and say, okay, are there tweaks that we should make? And so we made adjustments to our proposed framework where appropriate, and then that framework was approved in December of 2020. So we approved that framework, put it into our wildlife code, and the main messaging associated with this bear hunting season was that it's consistent with our mission as an agency, but also with our 2020 to 2030 bear management plan. It's a limited and highly regulated season that's really designed to provide opportunities to participate in the sustainable harvest of black bear for Missourians. So we did not have any non-resident permit. The bear population here can sustain a limited and really highly regulated harvest. And as that bear population continues to grow, hunting will serve as an essential component to management. But for these early seasons, it's really about providing that opportunity. So the next step, the way our framework was set up, was that we had to establish the harvest quotas. So we utilized our population model to understand the impacts of different harvest levels on the trajectory of our population. So we used scenario-based modeling using mixed sex and age harvest ratios from Arkansas. So real data from our neighboring state, what they saw early on in their season prior to them allowing baiting. And that allowed us to simulate possible harvests. So we had four mixed sex and age harvest scenarios. And so we looked at the effects of harvest if we took 30 bears, 40, 50, 60, and we looked at it at the mean, minimum, and maximum range of our population estimate. So we did not just select one part of our population estimate, we looked at it across that whole range. And so really what we were looking at here is, what does harvest do to the growth rate? And what do we see with that? So So we'd see these kind of general impacts across this. Really, harvest at all of these levels is sustainable. Remember, at this point, a declining population is not anything to be concerned about. We just need to be mindful that it would result in a decline in that growth rate. But we looked at this and said, okay, a 40 bear harvest quota, total harvest quota, would provide sufficient hunter opportunity, but it would also allow for continued population growth. So with that 40 bear harvest quota, we recognize that our population is robust enough to sustain that harvest up to 60 bears, but we would review harvest annually. We even put a stopgap in the regulations that if we approached 80% of a harvest quota prior to the season ending, that the director had the authority to close that season early, even if we didn't achieve the harvest quota. So we really took a conservative stepwise approach to implementation of this season. And then we utilized preliminary spatial models and estimated hunter success to distribute the permits and that quota across our bear management zones. So recognizing that bears aren't evenly distributed across the landscape, we wanted to be sure that we were spatially distributing the impacts of harvest and then still providing meaningful hunter opportunity. So we were able to distribute that 40 bear harvest quota across our 3 bear management zones and then distribute those permits across those zones accordingly. So we had our first season in 2021. We look at it as a really successful season. We harvested, to get to permit sales. So we sold out of the 200 permits for zone 1, which is down here in the very southern part of the state. This is really our core bear range. This is where bears have been established for the longest. 177 permits, 130 permits in zone 2, 40 permits in zone 3. We harvested 12 bears total. So 9 bears in zone 1. And if you remember, the permit quota associated with zone 1 was 20 bears, or the harvest quota for zone 1 was 20 bears. So well below the harvest quotas. And it was really critical for us to communicate that those harvest quotas were a cap on harvest. They were not a target. So we did not have a target level of harvest. It was literally a cap when we would close the season. Pretty expected distribution of harvest by land ownership. We have a lot of public land in the state, but we're still largely private land. And that sex ratio was an even 50-50. And so looking at that, our population was that first harvest, and then we've had a subsequent harvest this past year, a very sustainable harvest. So harvesting a bear in Missouri with the methods that we have available, it is not easy. It's a very challenging hunt. And so we really work with our hunters so that they understand success rates are likely to be low. It's a really challenging hunt, but for those that were successful, it's a really rewarding hunt. And we have a lot of folks that were really appreciative of the opportunity to be able to do it. But we're not without our challenges here. One of the things that we still work very heavily to communicate is that Missouri is bear country and that we have bears that can show up almost anywhere. And public education is super critical to this. We really focus on minimizing damage. And not unlike other places, our biggest issues are with bird feeders, beehives, trash, chickens. So we are part of Bearwise. We utilize that to help educate the public, provide us a lot of materials to hand out to the public. We also have wildlife damage biologists that respond to bear issues, and our bear biologist who goes out and does tons of different types of presentations and things like that. But some of our big challenges are associated with where connectivity takes these bears. So super connected, leading bears right to the Branson area. So one of the really high tourist areas of the state, really connected habitat, leading bears to the Lake of the Ozarks, one of the most visited lakes in the country. So not surprising that we get bear issues there. And between Lake of the Ozarks and Branson, we have a largely transient human population. So we have people that come in for a week and then they're gone. And so really working with campgrounds, working with rental areas to help communicate the bear message, working on getting bear resistant trash cans in places and containers and things like that. But then our other challenge is that a lot of this connectivity and habitat funnels these bears up into the St. Louis metro area. So we frequently get bears in the south suburbs of St. Louis. And we have had instances where we've had bears that show up in nearly downtown St. Louis. So a couple of years ago on Mother's Day, we had a bear that was in a very, very residential neighborhood up a tree, to the point where you can see from these pictures, lots of police, lots of fire trucks, lots of interest in what's going on with that bear. And so we do run into those situations where we have bears that show up in places where they shouldn't. And so this is a bear that wandered into the open doors of a school in early June in Eureka, Missouri. So Eureka is a far western suburb of St. Louis. It's kind of on the edge of the suburbs of St. Louis. The kids were not in school, luckily, but this bear walked through those open doors and then could not find his way back out, and ended up wandering into the boys' restroom. And the only place that the bear could go was into the drop ceiling. So we ended up having to immobilize this bear from the ceiling of the bathroom to get it out of that school. And the bear caused a significant amount of damage in that bathroom, just trying to escape to where it thought it could escape. So while we have lots of successful research going on, lots of successful management implementation, the ability to implement that first modern day bear season, we of course still struggle with the management challenges that many other states that have bears struggle with. And for us, many of these areas, this is brand new to them. And so that presents in and of itself some of the biggest challenges. So I can go ahead and stop sharing the screen here. And if we've got time for questions, I'm happy to take any questions.
I'm gonna switch the camera around here. Okay, so fantastic. So thank you very much. So just for our Zoom participants, because we have to be out of this room shortly, we're going to prioritize questions from the classroom at first, and then we'll get to Zoom questions. So if we need to stick around a little past 5, we'll just have to transition to another room, but everybody on Zoom can stay there. So, okay, do you want to handle, and we'll have to repeat questions so that you can hear them.
Yeah, sure. We'll start here. I'd like to ask, what is your personal favorite thing about working with black bears?
What is your personal favorite thing about working with black bears?
I think what I enjoyed the most about working with bears is that every bear was a different animal, and every year that I worked with even the same bears, it was a different experience. And so I felt like it was always a varied experience. There was always a lot of learning opportunities in working with them. And I think that just their behavior and adaptability is something that's really interesting to communicate to the public. So I've always enjoyed being able to provide that type of information. I mean, obviously handling them is super cool, and doing the den work and walking up within 5 feet of a bear that's just laying there, or while they're watching you walk up and everything. That's it. I'm not an adrenaline junkie by any means, but it certainly gets the heart pumping. So yeah, I think they're just a cool animal to work with.
Katie can relate.
Yeah, I agree with you. Good.
What kind of any significant ecological have the bears done in recent years since the populations are growing? Is there anything that has changed in the over the years? Anything good or bad?
Have there been any major ecological changes that the black bears have done, or has there been any major ecological changes in response to the growth of the bear population, good or bad, since?
I think that's a hard one. So, I mean, I know they play their role in the ecosystem, but at this point, it's not, I wouldn't say we've had the type of monitoring in place to be able to know what those ecosystem changes might be, right? So it's not that we're monitoring distribution of plants in a way that we would be able to see an impact in bears impacting the distribution of that. I think a bigger thing is it has changed potentially how our public interacts with the landscape and how our public views the habitats and things like that. And so the one thing that we've been able to communicate throughout this whole process is that the fact that we have bears in these forested environments and that they're using these forested environments shows that we do have a healthy ecosystem, and we have healthy forests, and that a lot of the land conservation work that has been done in the state over the last 90 years at this point, has really benefited them on the ground. So the resurgence of the Ozark forest and the ability for those forests to come back, that's provided the habitat for those bears. But our research also shows, and we see it elsewhere in the country, you know, as those bears continue to expand, they will eventually start to use more marginal habitats. And so we will start seeing bears showing up in some of those more marginal areas, which will be its own, you know, unique set of challenges.
Yeah, good.
How many bears are usually collared at once during these studies?
How many bears are usually collared at once during these studies?
Yeah, so it's kind of varied. So generally we try to keep that sample size around 20 collared bears. During the peak of it, it was closer to 30. During all the survival work and the recruitment work, we really were focusing on collaring female bears. Early on in the study, we had males collared as well. So we've kind of put collars on males here and there. But early on in the study, that was the focus. But over the course of the entire study at this point, I think we're somewhere around, gosh, in the hundreds of bears that have worn a collar at some point during the duration of our study.
Oh,
Do they have a target population for the overall growth they want to see in the state?
Do you have a target population for overall what you'd like to see in the state?
So no, not right now. So that's actually one of the things that's identified in our bear management plan. And so that's where that human dimensions study really comes into place. So our plan identifies that we want to create population benchmarks that are in line with what the habitat can support. And so we have our estimates of what that carrying capacity of the landscape could look like, knowing full well that the social carrying capacity is likely to be much lower than that. So really, the next couple of years, that's what Nate is going to be kind of pushing to the forefront, is creating those region-specific population benchmarks so that we can understand where we are with respect to that bear population. And then if we need to, start understanding how harvest is going to be utilized to help achieve those different population benchmarks.
What is that? What's the ecological capacity?
so what is the ecological carrying capacity then?
Yeah, so when we looked at that, we looked at both high quality bear habitat and then marginal habitat. And so if we include the marginal habitat within that, I believe it was around 5,500 bears.
Okay, yeah, so ecological carrying capacity and social carrying capacity.
Right. They're going to be much different, right? And much of that marginal habitat would take bears into much closer proximity to St. Louis, to Lake of the Ozarks, and to some of those areas as you get closer to the Missouri River, where we have more of our human population. So yeah.
Okay.
Chris,
What's the main cause of mortality in bears in Missouri?
what is the main cause of mortality in bears in Missouri?
Yeah, so at this point, you know, the main causes of mortality are human induced causes of mortality. So whether that be road kills, now that we have a harvest, so harvest factors into that, of course, that's a known type of mortality. But when we look at our adult survival rates, so once bears get to 4+ years old, those survival rates are still exceptionally high. So we still see survival rates for females in that 95 to 99% annual survival. So once they hit adulthood, they typically make it for a number of years. Obviously, for those younger age classes, the survival rates are lower. As the population is increasing, though, we are seeing more roadkill bears, but it's a byproduct of more bears being on the landscape and then interacting with those major roadways as they expand out of the more rural parts of the state.
Okay,
So we
we
have,
can do one more.
What's the oldest bear?
what's the oldest bear that you've found?
So here in Missouri, the oldest bear that we've had collared was around 21 years old. When I worked in Massachusetts, we had one that was around 26 years old when she was harvested. So they're very interesting bears. You know, you get them in hand and they have no teeth whatsoever, and you wonder, how do they eat anything? But they do just fine.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to get a couple questions from Zoom real quick, and then we're going to have to, actually, we should probably move out of the room
Yeah.
to get the less new people in. So thank you.
Thank you. Yep. I'll stick around for the Zoom
Don't
questions.
mind hanging out for a couple more questions. I apologize to our Zoom viewers. This is going to be an awkward transition. but I'm going to go ahead and move so I can get those questions answered. So I'll be right back. Yeah, so first of all, I'd like to say sorry to those of you who joined us live via Zoom, and unfortunately we had to transition and we ended up having the meeting end. So for those of you that were on Zoom and had some questions, I'm gonna ask those questions to Laura, and she'll answer them now, and this will be on our YouTube channel, or at the College of Natural Resources YouTube channel. So I believe you might have mentioned this in your talk, but do you allow baiting and use of dogs in Missouri?
So we do not. So when we established the hunting season, we opted not to allow baiting in the use of dogs. So it is still hunting or spot and stalk hunting in the state. So that is one of the reasons we do have, we see those lower success rates. But as we went through and proposed the framework, bait and dogs were part of the conversation. We opted to not allow it, but we included it as something that could be considered if management needs changed. So it is not something that's allowed currently in the state.
So as a follow-up question, I was going to ask, so what management goals or whatever would make you consider using bears or dogs? Like what would change that would made you consider?
Yeah, so I think that's, I think it would factor into the population benchmarks and how Harvest was achieving targets. So at this point, our season is really designed for providing opportunity. And so we have sufficient opportunity. The opportunity exists. It exists in multiple zones. We have a lot of interest in the season and things like that. So really, I think that conversation would be a very management specific conversation. So not anything at this point that, a season for opportunity would necessitate that kind of conversation.
I see. Do you have results on the human bear interactions on whether respondents specified positive versus negative interactions?
Yeah, so I'd have to go back. It's been a while since I've read that part of it. So yeah, I mean, folks did have negative interactions, so where bears were causing damage and things like that. But by and large, overall, I would say the public here has a very positive sentiment towards bears. And so that is something that was really important for us to get baseline information on, right? We don't have baseline public attitudes at this point. So that human dimension study really allowed us to get to some of that baseline information. So, okay, at this point in time with this population level, this is how our public views it. And then the idea being that in subsequent years, then you can continue to ask those same types of questions, and then we can identify what are some of those questions that we would categorize as those that would impact social carrying capacity, and then look at those questions and their change over time as that bear range changes and as the bear population numbers change too, because a big part of it for us too is that we have our core of the bear population where bears have been established for a really long time. So that's an area where I wouldn't say it's a one-to-one comparison for public attitudes to areas where bears are brand new, right? Folks in the core have been living with bears for the last several decades. And that's something that they just know is part of their landscape. As you get to those expansion areas, it's brand new. So what is that what's the lag associated with that? How does perception change? And then how, as bears maintain in an area, does perception stay the same? Does it change? So I think that's something that this information is really it's baseline information for us that we can start to look at. All right, what are some of those key questions that would indicate potential needs for management changes or how we focus education and things like that.
Great, excellent, thank you. One more question. Do you anticipate as the population continues to increase interstate? Oh, I'm sorry. Do you anticipate as the population continues to increase interstate management initiatives starting?
So I guess I'm guessing by that question, they mean kind of collaborative management efforts between Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Missouri. So we were the last of the 3 states to initiate a bear season. So Arkansas and Oklahoma have had a bear season for a number of years. So Arkansas's had a season since the 1980s. Oklahoma's had a season since the early 2000s or mid 2000s. So each state, I don't see changes in how we approach harvest management within our individual jurisdictions. But there are a lot of opportunities for collaborative work. So our initial population study, we also collected samples or solicited samples, hair samples from Arkansas and Oklahoma, so we could understand then what that distribution of, like, where did our bears come from? What is the bulk of, how does that look on the landscape? So I could envision those types of collaborative efforts continuing into the future. We've also, we do discuss bear management in general. We know bears don't know political boundaries. And so those bears, I mean, we have collared bears that go into Arkansas and likewise. So we maintain very open lines of communication there. One of the things that we've been working on is looking at getting an interstate disease study going. So looking at mange. So Arkansas and Oklahoma have been experiencing mange cases for a couple of years. It's newer in Missouri. We've had a handful of confirmed mange cases, not very many at this point, but recognizing how mange has moved across to the East Coast and how the distribution of mange has changed. That's one of those things where we've talked about the opportunity for getting into some of those more collaborative studies where we can look at kind of disease at the regional level. So our central interior highlands bear population, rather than just individual jurisdictions kind of doing their own thing associated with that. So those specific management opportunities, I think there's still jurisdictional differences that are always going to be there. But I think there's always lots of opportunity for different collaborative efforts that could come from just those relationships being there.
Excellent. No, sounds good. So that's the last question we had from Zoom. So I didn't get to say a proper thank you previously.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
But no, thank you very much for participating in this seminar series.
Yeah, happy to do so.
This has been a really informative talk.